I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Margaret standing at the end of my driveway with her arms crossed, wearing that expression that could curdle milk. The woman had made herself president of the Ridgemont HOA 3 years ago, and ever since then, she had turned our quiet neighborhood in eastern Pennsylvania into her personal kingdom. I was splitting oak logs in my front yard, the satisfying crack of wood echoing through the crisp October morning, when she marched up my property line like she owned the place. My name is Nathan Vickers, and I had been running a small firewood business from my 3-acre property in Delaware County for the better part of 15 years. Long before Margaret and her band of busybodies decided that every mailbox needed to be hunter green, and long before they demanded everyone's grass be cut to exactly 2.5 inches. My grandfather built the house I lived in back in 1947, and my father inherited it before passing it down to me. The property had always been used for commercial purposes to some degree. My grandfather sold produce from his garden, my father ran a small engine repair shop out of the barn, and I sold firewood. "Nathan," Margaret called out, her voice sharp enough to split wood on its own. "We need to talk about this immediately." I set down my maul and wiped the sweat from my forehead despite the cool autumn air. "Morning, Margaret. What can I do for you?" She thrust a folder at me, her perfectly manicured nails painted the color of dried blood. This illegal operation you are running out of your home. The HOA board met last night, and we have voted unanimously to shut down your firewood business. It is a clear violation of our community standards and regulations. I took the folder but did not open it right away. "Margaret, I have been selling firewood from this property since 2010. The HOA was not even established until 2015. My business predates your organization by 5 years." Her eyes narrowed. "That is irrelevant. When you signed the HOA agreement in 2015, you agreed to abide by all rules and regulations, including those prohibiting commercial operations on residential properties. Section 8, subsection 3 clearly states no home-based businesses that involve outdoor storage, excessive traffic, or commercial vehicles. I did not sign anything agreeing to shut down my existing business," I said, finally opening the folder. Inside was a cease and desist letter, stamped with the HOA seal and signed by all 5 board members. "And I would like to see where it says I cannot continue an operation that was grandfathered in." Margaret's face flushed red. "There is no grandfather clause. The rules apply to everyone equally. You have until November 1st to cease all firewood operations, remove all wood piles, and restore your property to residential standards. That gives you 3 weeks. I looked past her to where my neatly stacked rows of split oak, maple, and cherry stood. I had about 40 cords ready for the winter season, with customers already paid in advance. The business brought in decent money, enough to cover my property taxes and maintenance costs, plus a little extra. More importantly, it kept me active and gave me purpose after my wife Sarah died 4 years ago. The physical labor, the satisfaction of providing quality firewood to people who heated their homes with wood stoves, the conversations with customers who became friends over the years. Margaret wanted to take all of that away because she thought a few stacks of wood looked unsightly. "I am not shutting down my business," I said, handing the folder back to her. "If you have an issue with it, you can take it up with my lawyer." Her nostrils flared. "We will fine you. $100 per day until you comply. And if you do not pay the fines, we will place a lien on your property." "You can try," I said, picking up my maul again. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." Margaret stood there for another moment, clearly expecting me to cave under her authority. When I went back to splitting logs, she spun on her heel and marched back down the driveway, her expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. I knew this was not over. Margaret was the type of person who could not stand being told no. She had successfully bullied old Mrs. Henderson into removing her garden gnomes, forced the Petersons to repaint their shutters 3 times until they got the right shade of colonial blue, and made Jack Sullivan tear down the treehouse he built for his kids because it was not architecturally consistent with the neighborhood aesthetic. But I was not going to fold like they did. This was my property, my business, my livelihood. That evening I called my lawyer, Tom Morrison. Tom and I had gone to high school together, and he had handled the probate when my father passed away. He listened as I explained the situation, the occasional sound of papers rustling on his end of the line. "So they are claiming your business violates HOA covenants," Tom said after I finished. "But you started the business in 2010, and the HOA was not formed until 2015, correct?" And when the HOA was formed, I never agreed to any terms that would shut down my existing business. I reviewed those documents with you back then. Remember? I do remember. We specifically noted that your firewood operation was ongoing. Let me pull those files and review exactly what you signed. In Pennsylvania, property rights that predate HOA formation are generally protected, especially if the business was established and operating continuously. This could be a straightforward case of pre-existing use. "That is what I thought," I said, feeling a bit of relief. "But Margaret seems convinced she has the authority to shut me down." "HOAs often overestimate their power," Tom said. "Give me a few days to review the documents and research the specific statutes. In the meantime, do not sign anything they send you and document everything. Every conversation, every letter, every interaction. If this goes to court, we will need a clear record." The next morning, I found a violation notice stuck to my front door. It listed 15 separate infractions, including unsightly wood storage, commercial vehicle operation, excessive noise before 8 in the morning, and environmental concerns about wood debris. The notice stated that daily fines of $100 would begin accruing on November 1st if I did not come into compliance. I took photos of the notice and emailed them to Tom. Over the next week, Margaret and her HOA board members drove by my property multiple times each day. I saw her sitting in her silver Mercedes, taking photos with her phone. 2 other board members, Linda and Patricia, parked across the street one afternoon with a notebook, apparently documenting how many customers came to pick up firewood orders. It was harassment, plain and simple, but I kept working. I had orders to fill, and my customers depended on me. One of my regular customers, an older man named Frank Rivera who lived 3 towns over, showed up on a Wednesday afternoon to pick up his usual 2 cords. As I helped him load the wood into his pickup truck, he asked why people were taking pictures of my property. "HOA trouble," I explained, stacking another piece of oak into his truck bed. "They want me to shut down the firewood business." Frank shook his head. "That is ridiculous. You have been doing this for years. I have been buying from you for 8 seasons now?" "About that, yeah. Best firewood in the county. Seasoned properly, cut to perfect size, honest measurements. Those HOA types do not understand the value of an honest business." He handed me cash for the wood. "You let me know if you need someone to testify to how long you have been operating. I keep receipts from every year." "I appreciate that, Frank. My lawyer might take you up on that offer." After Frank left, another car pulled up, but this was not a customer. It was a code enforcement officer from Delaware County. He was a young guy, probably late 20s, who looked uncomfortable as he approached me. "Nathan Vickers?" he asked. "That is me. I am Officer Reed from County Code Enforcement. We received a complaint about illegal commercial activity on a residential property. I need to inspect your operation and verify compliance with county zoning regulations." My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice calm. "I am happy to cooperate. What do you need to see?" Officer Reed walked around my property, taking notes on a tablet. He measured the wood piles, checked the distance from the property line, looked at my barn and equipment. After about 20 minutes, he came back to where I was standing. "Sir, according to county records, this property is zoned R2, residential. However, I see in the historical notes that there has been continuous commercial activity on this site since at least the 1960s. Can you provide documentation of your business operations?" I went inside and retrieved my folder of business records. I had kept meticulous files since starting the Firewood operation, including business licenses, tax returns, customer invoices, and receipts. I showed him everything, including photos from 2010 showing the early days of my operation. Officer Reed reviewed the documents carefully. "These records are thorough, and you have been paying business taxes on this income. Every year, I run everything above board." He nodded slowly. "Sir, based on what I am seeing here, you have a legitimate pre-existing non-conforming use. The commercial activity predates current zoning restrictions and has been continuous. As long as you do not significantly expand the scope or intensity of the operation, you are legally permitted to continue under Pennsylvania zoning law." Relief washed over me. So the HOA cannot force me to shut down. The HOA has to comply with county and state law, same as everyone else. They cannot override your legal pre-existing use rights. I will file my report stating that you are in compliance with county regulations. He handed me a copy of his inspection notes. "Keep this for your records. If they continue to harass you, you may want to consult with an attorney about your options." "Already have one," I said, shaking his hand. "Thank you for being fair about this." After he left, I immediately called Tom to tell him the good news. He was pleased but cautioned me that the HOA would likely escalate rather than back down. "Margaret strikes me as the type who does not accept defeat easily," Tom said. "She will probably try to find other ways to pressure you. Just stay vigilant and keep documenting everything." Tom was right. The next day, I found another notice on my door. This one claimed my wood piles were a fire hazard and demanded I install fire suppression equipment or remove all wood from the property within 10 days. The notice cited obscure HOA bylaws about fire safety that I was certain had been written specifically to target my business. I photographed the notice and sent it to Tom, then called the local fire marshal's office. If there were legitimate fire safety concerns, I wanted to address them properly. Fire Marshal Davis came out that afternoon. He was a stocky man in his 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor. "Let me be straight with you, Mr. Vickers," he said after inspecting my wood storage. "Your firewood operation poses no more fire risk than a typical residential wood pile. You are keeping it away from structures, the wood is properly stacked and seasoned, and you are not storing any flammable liquids nearby. I see no violations of fire code." "The HOA is claiming otherwise," I said, showing him their notice. He read it and frowned. "They are referencing sections of code that do not apply to outdoor wood storage. This is either written by someone who does not understand fire safety regulations, or it is deliberately misleading. Either way, from a fire marshal's perspective, you are fine. I will send a letter to the HOA confirming that your operation meets all fire safety standards." "I cannot tell you how much I appreciate this," I said. "Just doing my job. HOAs sometimes get ideas that do not align with actual safety codes. We deal with it more often than you would think." That evening, Margaret called me directly. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Nathan, you are making this much more difficult than it needs to be. The board is prepared to take legal action if you do not comply with our directives." "Margaret, I have had the county code enforcement and the fire marshal inspect my property in the past 2 days. Both confirmed I am operating legally and safely. Your HOA does not have the authority to override county and state law. We have authority over community standards and property values. Your junkyard-looking operation is bringing down everyone's home values in this neighborhood. It is not a junkyard. It is neatly stacked firewood, and I have been operating this business for 5 years before your HOA even existed. My property rights predate your authority." "We will see what a judge says about that," she snapped and hung up. 3 days later, I received a summons. The HOA was taking me to court, seeking an injunction to shut down my business and demanding payment of accumulated fines that now totaled $7,000, claiming they had the right to backdate fines to when they first discovered my violation. Tom filed a response on my behalf, and we were scheduled for a hearing in Delaware County Court in 6 weeks. "They are going all in," Tom said when we met at his office to prepare. "But frankly, I like our chances. Pennsylvania law is pretty clear about pre-existing use rights, and we have documentation up the wazoo. The HOA is going to have a tough time arguing they can retroactively eliminate a business that was established before they even existed. What about those fines they are claiming? Completely bogus. They cannot impose fines for activity that was legal when it occurred. That would be like me changing my house rules today and then fining you for something you did last year. It does not work that way legally." We spent the next several weeks preparing for court. Tom gathered affidavits from longtime neighbors who confirmed my business had been operating since 2010. Frank Rivera provided detailed receipts showing 8 years of purchases, proving the continuous nature of my operation. The county code enforcement officer and fire marshal both provided written statements confirming I was in compliance with all relevant regulations. Tom also dug up the original HOA formation documents, which showed that, while I had agreed to abide by reasonable covenants, there was no specific language prohibiting pre-existing businesses. During this time, Margaret continued her campaign of harassment. She sent letters to all my neighbors encouraging them to report any disturbances from my property. She filed noise complaints with the police, who came out, found nothing wrong, and told me they were tired of responding to frivolous calls. She even contacted several of my customers, telling them my wood was illegally sourced and threatening them with HOA violations if they continued to purchase from me, even though most of my customers lived outside the HOA boundaries. That last move particularly angered me. I was losing business because of her lies. 3 customers canceled orders, costing me over $1,500 in lost revenue. Tom advised me to document all the economic damages, as we might have grounds for a counterclaim. The harassment reached a peak 2 weeks before our court date. I came home from running errands to find that someone had scattered trash across my wood piles and spray painted "illegal business" on the side of my barn in bright red letters. I immediately called the police. Officer Jennifer Thompson responded to the call. She was a young officer I had seen around town but never spoken with directly. She took photos of the vandalism and asked if I had any security cameras. "I do not, but I am installing some tomorrow," I said. "I have a pretty good idea who is behind this, though." The HOA president. Officer Thompson asked. Yeah, we have been getting calls about the situation. Look, I cannot accuse anyone without evidence, but I would definitely get those cameras up soon and file a report with your insurance about the barn damage. You think Margaret would actually go this far? I asked. Officer Thompson looked at me seriously. In my 3 years on the force, I have seen HOA disputes get ugly. Some people become obsessed with control. If she did not do this herself, she might have convinced someone else to do it. Either way, protect yourself and document everything. I spent the next day installing security cameras around my property, covering all angles of the wood storage area, the barn, and the driveway. The cameras had motion detection and night vision, uploading footage to cloud storage. I wished I had installed them sooner, but at least now I would have evidence if anything else happened. 5 days before the court hearing, something else did happen. I was inside eating dinner when my phone alerted me to motion detected by the cameras. I pulled up the live feed and saw 2 figures in dark clothing approaching my wood piles with what looked like gas cans. My blood ran cold. They were going to set my firewood on fire. I called 911 immediately while running outside. This is Nathan Vickers at 2847 Maple Ridge Road. There are 2 people on my property attempting to commit arson. I have them on camera right now. The dispatcher stayed on the line as I turned on my floodlights. The sudden illumination caught the 2 figures by surprise. They dropped the gas cans and ran toward the tree line at the back of my property. I did not chase them. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher and kept the camera feed recording until police arrived 3 minutes later. Officer Thompson was part of the response team. They secured the gas cans as evidence and reviewed my camera footage. The video clearly showed 2 people in hoodies and masks approaching with containers, though their faces were not visible. Mr. Vickers, this is attempted arson, Officer Thompson said. That is a second-degree felony in Pennsylvania. We are going to take this very seriously. Can you email us all the footage from your security system? Already done. I sent it to the general police email while you were reviewing the scene. Another officer, a sergeant named Miller, approached us. Sir, given the ongoing dispute with your HOA, we have to consider that this might be connected. Do you have any reason to believe specific individuals from the HOA would go this far? Margaret has been escalating her harassment for weeks, I said, but attempting to burn down my property. I would not have thought even she would do that. Then again, I would not have thought someone would vandalize my barn either. Sergeant Miller nodded. We will be investigating all angles. In the meantime, I recommend you stay somewhere else tonight, just to be safe. We will have a patrol car drive by regularly, but if someone is willing to attempt arson, they might try again. I called my brother David, who lived 20 minutes away and stayed at his house that night. David had been following the HOA situation and was furious when I told him about the attempted arson. Nathan, this has gone way too far, David said. These people are crazy. You need to push for criminal charges, not just fight them in civil court. The police are investigating. What else can I do? Make sure Tom knows about this. It shows a pattern of escalating illegal behavior. The judge needs to see that the HOA is not just overreaching legally, they are engaging in criminal conduct to get their way. The next morning, I went back home with David accompanying me. Everything looked secure, and the police had taken the gas cans as evidence. I called Tom and filled him in on the arson attempt. This changes things, Tom said. I am going to file an emergency motion with the court, requesting a restraining order against Margaret and the HOA board members. This is beyond a civil property dispute now. This is criminal harassment and intimidation. Will the judge grant it? With video evidence of attempted arson, police reports of ongoing harassment, and documentation of vandalism, I think we have a strong case. I will file it today and try to get a hearing before our main court date. Tom worked fast. By that afternoon, he had filed the emergency motion, including all evidence of harassment, vandalism, and the attempted arson. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing for 2 days later. During those 2 days, the police investigation progressed quickly. They analyzed the gas cans and found fingerprints. The prints matched a man named Dennis Crawford, who turned out to be Patricia's son. Patricia was one of the HOA board members who had been surveilling my property with Margaret. Dennis was 24 years old with a prior record for vandalism and assault. Officer Thompson called me with the update. We brought Dennis Crawford in for questioning. He broke pretty quickly and admitted to the arson attempt. He also admitted to vandalizing your barn last week. He says his mother, Patricia, asked him to send you a message about shutting down your business. So Patricia directed him to commit these crimes. That is what he claims. We are bringing Patricia in for questioning now. This could result in charges for conspiracy to commit arson, solicitation of criminal activity, and vandalism. Your HOA dispute just became a criminal case. The emergency hearing took place on a Thursday morning. Tom and I arrived at the courthouse early. Margaret showed up with an expensive-looking attorney named Richard Blackstone. Patricia was notably absent, presumably dealing with her criminal charges. The other 3 board members, Linda, Robert, and Stephen, stood nervously in the hallway, looking like they wanted to be anywhere else. Judge Catherine Foster presided over the hearing. She was a stern woman in her early 60s who had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Tom presented our evidence methodically. The timeline of harassment, the false citations, the vandalism, the police reports, and most importantly, the video and police evidence of the attempted arson connected to an HOA board member. Margaret's attorney tried to argue that Patricia's actions were not officially sanctioned by the HOA and therefore should not reflect on the organization as a whole. Judge Foster was not having it. Counselor, Mrs. Patricia Martin is a sitting board member of this HOA. She allegedly directed her son to commit arson against Mr. Vickers's property as part of this dispute over his business operations. That absolutely reflects on the HOA's conduct in this matter, Judge Foster said sharply. She reviewed all the evidence, asking pointed questions about the HOA's authority, the timeline of my business operations, and the escalating harassment. After 30 minutes, she made her ruling. I am granting the restraining order, Judge Foster announced. Margaret Stone, Linda Chen, Robert Palmer, and Stephen Davis are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Mr. Vickers or his property except as required for the upcoming civil hearing. The HOA is prohibited from any further enforcement actions, fine assessments, or communications with Mr. Vickers except through legal counsel. Furthermore, I am deeply troubled by the evidence of criminal conduct. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of possible criminal charges against the HOA board for conspiracy and harassment. Margaret looked like she had been slapped. Her attorney whispered urgently to her, but she just sat there, red-faced and rigid. Your Honor, Tom said, we would also like to request that the civil hearing scheduled for next week be expedited given the circumstances. Agreed. We will proceed as scheduled. I want this matter resolved quickly before anyone else gets hurt. Judge Foster looked directly at Margaret. Mrs. Stone, let me be very clear. If there are any further incidents of harassment, vandalism, or any contact with Mr. Vickers outside of proper legal channels, I will hold you personally in contempt and consider criminal charges. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Margaret said quietly, her voice stripped of its usual authority. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The restraining order would at least give me some breathing room before the main hearing. Tom was optimistic about our chances. "That judge basically telegraphed how she views this case," Tom said. "She sees the HOA as overreaching and engaging in illegal conduct. I think we are in good shape for next week." That weekend, the local news picked up the story. A reporter from the Delaware County Times called me for an interview. I was hesitant at first, but Tom advised that public attention might actually help our case by putting pressure on the HOA to back down. The article ran on Monday with the headline, "HOA board member charged in arson plot against Firewood business owner." It detailed the criminal charges against Patricia, the restraining order against the HOA board, and the upcoming civil hearing. The article also included background about my 15-year-old business and my family's long history of commercial operations on the property. The response was immediate. I received dozens of supportive calls and emails from people in the community. Several neighbors who had stayed silent during the dispute came forward to apologize for not supporting me earlier. Many admitted they had been afraid of Margaret and the HOA board, worried about fines and retaliation if they spoke up. The article also caught the attention of a local news station. A reporter named Felicia Rodriguez called and asked if I would do an on-camera interview. I agreed, figuring that more public attention could only help at this point. Felicia showed up with a cameraman the next day. She was a sharp, professional journalist in her 30s who had clearly done her homework. She interviewed me in front of my firewood piles, asking about my business, the HOA dispute, and the attempted arson. "What do you think motivated the HOA to take such extreme measures against your business?" Felicia asked on camera. "I think it comes down to control," I said. "Margaret and the board want complete authority over this neighborhood. They cannot accept that my property rights might supersede their rules." Rather than acknowledge the law, they chose to escalate to harassment and ultimately criminal activity. "Your court hearing is scheduled for this Friday. What are you hoping will happen?" "I just want to continue running my business in peace. This property has been in my family since 1947. We have always used it for commercial purposes. I am not doing anything wrong, and I should not have to stop earning a living because an HOA formed years after I started my business." The interview aired that evening on the local news. The response was overwhelmingly positive. The comments on the station's website and social media pages ran about 90% in my favor, with people expressing outrage at the HOA's conduct and support for property rights. By Wednesday, 2 days before the hearing, the pressure on the HOA had become intense. 3 of the 5 board members, Linda, Robert, and Stephen, resigned. They released a joint statement saying they had not been aware of Patricia's criminal actions and did not support the aggressive tactics used against me. This left only Margaret as the remaining board member from the original dispute. Tom called me Wednesday evening with interesting news. The HOA's attorney reached out. They want to discuss a settlement. "What kind of settlement?" "They are willing to drop all fines, acknowledge your right to continue your business, and amend the HOA covenants to include a grandfather clause for pre-existing commercial operations. In exchange, they want you to agree to some reasonable restrictions, like limiting delivery hours and maintaining neat wood storage." "What about Margaret? Is she stepping down?" "That was not mentioned, but Nathan, I think we should at least hear them out. A settlement would save you the stress of a trial, and we can negotiate terms that protect your rights going forward." Set up a meeting, I said. But I want Margaret out as HOA president. That is non-negotiable. She has made my life hell for weeks, and she created an environment where board members thought it was acceptable to commit crimes against me. The settlement meeting took place Thursday afternoon at Tom's office. Margaret showed up with Richard Blackstone. The tension in the conference room was thick enough to cut with a saw. Let me start by saying the HOA regrets the escalation of this dispute, Richard began carefully. Recent events, particularly the criminal actions of former board member Patricia Martin, do not reflect the values or intentions of the organization. Patricia acted on behalf of the HOA to shut down my business, I said. She might have gone further than others wanted, but the harassment started with Margaret sending me that first cease and desist letter. Margaret looked like she wanted to argue, but her attorney put a hand on her arm. Richard continued. The HOA is prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement that recognizes your pre-existing rights to operate your Firewood business. We will formally amend the covenants to include a grandfather clause, drop all fines, and acknowledge that your operation predates our authority. And what restrictions are you proposing? Tom asked. Reasonable operational limits. Deliveries and wood splitting only between 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Wood piles maintained at least 50 feet from property lines. All wood stacked neatly and covered during winter months. Commercial vehicles used for the business should be parked behind your house when not in active use. I glanced at Tom, who gave me a small nod. These restrictions were reasonable and mostly reflected how I already operated anyway. I can agree to those terms on one condition, I said, looking directly at Margaret. Margaret Stone resigns as HOA president immediately. Margaret's face flushed red. You cannot demand that. That is not related to the business dispute. It absolutely is related, I said. You created a toxic environment where board members thought criminal activity was acceptable. You harassed me, lied to my customers, filed false complaints, and led a campaign of intimidation. I will not sign any agreement that leaves you in a position of authority over this neighborhood. Mrs. Stone, Tom said, my client is prepared to go to court on Friday if necessary. I believe we will prevail based on the evidence, and frankly, your position is legally untenable. Judge Foster has already indicated skepticism about your authority. If we proceed to trial, you risk a judgment that not only allows my client to continue his business without any restrictions, but also potentially exposes you to personal liability for the harassment and damages he has suffered. A settlement is in your best interest, and Mr. Vickers's condition is reasonable given the circumstances. Richard leaned over and whispered urgently to Margaret. They spoke quietly for several minutes while Tom and I waited. Finally, Margaret turned back to us. I will resign as president, she said, her voice brittle. But I am not admitting any wrongdoing. I was acting in what I believed were the best interests of the community. Your resignation is sufficient, Tom said. We are not requiring an admission as part of this settlement, though Mr. Vickers reserves the right to pursue civil damages in the future if he chooses. We spent the next hour hammering out the details of the settlement agreement. The HOA would formally recognize my right to continue operating my Firewood business as a pre-existing non-conforming use. All fines and penalties would be permanently waived. The HOA covenants would be amended to include a grandfather clause protecting any commercial operations that were established before the HOA's formation in 2015. I would agree to the operational restrictions regarding hours, wood storage, and vehicle parking. Margaret would resign as president within 48 hours, and the HOA would hold new elections for the board position within 30 days, Both sides signed the agreement Thursday evening. As Margaret left Tom's office, she would not look at me. She had lost, and everyone knew it. Her resignation would be effective by Saturday, and the court hearing scheduled for Friday would be canceled since the matter was resolved. Walking out of the office, I felt exhausted but vindicated. Tom shook my hand. "Congratulations, Nathan. You stood your ground and won." Most people would have caved under that kind of pressure. I could not let her take away something that has been in my family for generations. This property, the right to earn a living from it, that is who we are. My grandfather would have fought just as hard. That evening I called David to tell him about the settlement. He was thrilled and insisted on taking me out for dinner to celebrate. Over steaks at a local restaurant, we talked about the whole ordeal. "You know what the craziest part is?" David said. "If Margaret had just left you alone, none of this would have happened. Your Firewood operation was not bothering anyone, but she had to exert control and it cost her everything." "She is still living in the neighborhood," I pointed out. "That is going to be awkward. Let it be awkward." "You were in the right. She was wrong. End of story." The next day, I received a call from Officer Thompson. Patricia had been formally charged with conspiracy to commit arson and solicitation of criminal activity. Her son Dennis faced charges of attempted arson and criminal mischief. Both had been released on bail pending trial. "What about Margaret?" I asked. "Is she facing any charges?" "The district attorney reviewed all the evidence," Officer Thompson said. While Margaret's conduct was definitely problematic from a civil standpoint, they could not establish sufficient evidence that she personally conspired in the criminal activities. Patricia and Dennis are facing charges, but Margaret is in the clear criminally. However, the DA's office did note your settlement agreement and her resignation from the HOA, so that matter appears resolved. I was disappointed that Margaret faced no criminal consequences, but I understood. Without direct evidence linking her to the arson attempt or vandalism, it would be hard to prove criminal intent. The settlement and her forced resignation would have to be enough. Word of the settlement spread quickly through the neighborhood. Saturday morning, several neighbors stopped by to congratulate me and express relief that the dispute was over. Old Mrs. Henderson, who lived 3 houses down, brought me homemade cookies and apologized for not supporting me earlier. "I was afraid of Margaret," she admitted. "After she made me remove my garden gnomes, I did not want to cross her again. But what she did to you was wrong. I am glad you stood up to her." Jack Sullivan, whose treehouse had been torn down by HOA order, stopped by that afternoon. "Nathan, you are a hero in this neighborhood right now. You did what the rest of us were too scared to do. You beat the HOA." "I did not beat the HOA," I said. "I just protected my rights. The HOA can serve a useful purpose if run by reasonable people. Margaret was the problem, not the concept of an HOA." "Well, I am running for the board in the special election," Jack said. "Linda, Robert, and Stephen already resigned, so there are 4 open positions. I want to help rebuild the organization into something that actually serves the community instead of terrorizing it." "You would be good for the board," I said. "You understand what it is like to be on the receiving end of overreach." Over the following weeks, life gradually returned to normal. I continued filling firewood orders for the season. My customers who had been scared off by Margaret's threats came back, and I even gained new customers who had heard about my situation on the news and wanted to support my business. The special HOA election took place in late November. Jack Sullivan won one of the open board positions, along with 3 other neighbors who ran on a platform of reasonable governance and respect for property rights. One of the first actions of the new board was to formally issue a written apology to me for the previous board's conduct, and to confirm the settlement terms in the official HOA records. Margaret and her husband put their house on the market in December. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they were moving to a condo community in another county. Margaret could not handle living in a neighborhood where she was no longer in control and where everyone knew how badly she had overreached. I felt no sympathy for her. She had brought it all on herself through her arrogance and refusal to respect others' rights. Patricia and Dennis's criminal case moved through the court system slowly. In January, they both accepted plea deals. Dennis pleaded guilty to attempted arson and received 3 years of probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. Patricia pleaded guilty to solicitation of criminal activity and received 2 years of probation. Both were required to pay restitution for the damage to my barn, which came to $4,800 for repainting and repairs. On a cold February morning, I received the restitution check in the mail. I deposited it and used the money to make some improvements to my property, including better lighting around the wood storage area and additional security cameras. The ordeal had taught me the importance of documentation and security. Felicia Rodriguez from the news station did a follow-up story in March, 6 months after the initial dispute began. She interviewed me again, along with Jack Sullivan and some other neighbors. The story focused on how the neighborhood had recovered from the toxic HOA leadership and implemented reforms to prevent future abuses. Looking back on everything that happened, what would you say you learned from this experience? Felicia asked me during the interview. I learned that standing up for your rights is not easy, but it is necessary, I said. I learned that most people are reasonable and supportive if you give them the facts, and I learned that institutions like HOAs are only as good or bad as the people running them. When those people abuse their authority, it is crucial to push back, even when it is difficult. The firewood business thrived that year. The publicity from the dispute, while stressful at the time, had brought me new customers from across the county. People appreciated that I had stood up to HOA overreach, and they wanted to support a small business owner who had fought for his rights. By the time summer rolled around, and I began preparing for the next winter season, the whole incident felt like a distant bad dream. I was splitting oak logs in my front yard one warm June morning when a car pulled up. For a brief moment, I tensed, remembering Margaret's surprise visits. But it was just a new customer, a young couple who had recently bought a house with a wood stove and were looking for a reliable firewood supplier. "Are you Nathan Vickers?" the woman asked as they got out of their car. "That is me. We read about you in the news last year. We are new to the area and wanted to buy firewood from someone we could trust. Everyone says you are the most reliable supplier around." I smiled and set down my maul. "Well, you came to the right place. Let me show you what I have available." As I walked them through my inventory and explained my pricing, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, as painful as it was at the time. The dispute with Margaret and the HOA had forced me to document my business thoroughly, defend my property rights, and ultimately secure legal protections that ensured I could continue operating for years to come. The settlement agreement was recorded with the county, making it binding on any future HOA boards. My business was protected not just by my pre-existing use rights, but by a formal legal agreement that could not be challenged. More importantly, the experience had strengthened my connection to the community. I was no longer just the guy who sold firewood. I had become a symbol of standing up to bureaucratic overreach and defending individual rights. Neighbors who had barely acknowledged me before now waved when they drove by. People stopped to chat and ask how business was going. The sense of community, which Margaret had tried to control and dominate, had actually grown stronger through the conflict and its resolution. That evening, as I stacked the last of the day's split wood and watched the sun set over my property, I thought about my grandfather who had built this place, my father who had maintained it, and now me, who had defended it. 3 generations of Vickers men had worked this land and made a living from it. Thanks to standing my ground against the HOA, future generations would have that same opportunity. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Hey, just heard Margaret's house finally sold. She is officially gone from your neighborhood. Congratulations on outlasting her." I typed back a simple response. "Thanks for everything, Tom. Could not have done it without you. Any time. Though let us hope there is not a next time. You have had enough HOA drama for one lifetime." I laughed and put my phone away. Tom was right. I had definitely had enough HOA drama, but I was proud of how it had turned out. My property rights had been recognized and protected. A corrupt HOA president had been removed. Criminal behavior had been prosecuted. And I was still here, on my family's land, running the business I loved. The Firewood business continued to grow over the following year. I hired a part-time helper to keep up with demand, a retired carpenter named George who lived 2 towns over and appreciated the physical work. Together we processed and sold over 60 cords that winter, my most successful season yet. The new HOA board, led by Jack Sullivan and his fellow reformers, proved to be reasonable and focused on genuine community concerns rather than petty control. They organized neighborhood gatherings, coordinated snow removal on common areas, and mediated occasional disputes between neighbors with fairness and common sense. It was what an HOA should be. I never saw Margaret again after she moved away. Occasionally someone would mention seeing her at a shopping center or restaurant, but our paths never crossed. I bore her no ill will at that point. She had made her choices and faced the consequences. I had moved on. 2 years after the settlement, on a crisp October morning remarkably similar to the day Margaret first confronted me about my business, I was splitting wood in my yard when a car pulled up. An older couple got out, looking around with interest. "Can I help you folks?" I called out. "We hope so," the man said, approaching with a friendly smile. "We are thinking about buying a house in this neighborhood. We noticed your firewood operation and wanted to ask about it before we made an offer. We do not mind it at all, but we wanted to understand if there were any ongoing issues with the HOA." I set down my maul and walked over to them. "The HOA and I had a dispute a couple of years back, but it was resolved. I have full legal rights to operate this business, confirmed by settlement agreement and court order. The current HOA board is reasonable and supportive. You will not have any problems related to my operation." The woman looked relieved. "That is good to hear." The real estate agent mentioned something about past HOA controversy, but was not specific. "We like the neighborhood and the house we are looking at, but we wanted to make sure we were not walking into a war zone." "Not at all. The neighborhood is peaceful now. The previous HOA leadership had some issues, but that has all been resolved. If you do move here, you will find it is a good community with good people." They thanked me and left, apparently satisfied with my explanation. I watched them drive away and smiled. It was a good neighborhood now, with good people. And I had played a part in making it that way by refusing to back down when bullied, by standing up for what was right, and by trusting in the legal system to protect property rights that existed long before any HOA tried to claim authority over them. As I went back to splitting logs, the rhythmic crack of wood echoing through the clear autumn air, I felt at peace. This was my property, my business, my livelihood, and my right. I had defended it successfully, and it would be here for as long as I wanted to continue the work. That was worth every moment of stress, every confrontation with Margaret, every dollar spent on legal fees, and every sleepless night worrying about the outcome. The firewood operation that started as a way to earn some extra income and stay active after my wife died had become something more significant through the HOA dispute. It had become a statement about individual rights, about standing up to overreach, and about the importance of protecting what your family built across generations. My grandfather would have been proud. My father would have been proud. And I was proud of myself for not taking the easy way out by simply complying with unreasonable demands. The sun was setting as I finished my work for the day. I covered the newly split wood with tarps, secured my tools in the barn, and walked toward my house. Smoke rose from chimneys throughout the neighborhood as people lit their wood stoves against the cooling evening air. Many of them were burning wood I had sold them, wood I had cut, split, seasoned, and delivered with the same care and attention to quality that my family had always provided. This was more than a business. It was a tradition, a legacy. And now, thanks to everything that had happened with the HOA, it was a legally protected right that could not be taken away by anyone's arbitrary rules or desire for control. The court had ruled in my favor, acknowledging that my property rights predated the HOA's authority, and that ruling would stand as precedent for years to come. As I stepped inside my house and closed the door behind me, I thought one final time about Margaret and her misguided crusade to shut down my operation. She had failed completely. I was still here, still working, still thriving. The HOA no longer threatened me. The neighborhood supported me. The law protected me. And my firewood business would continue for as long as I chose to run it, just as it should be.